afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all well. Another week, another Haftarah study. What can I say? I mean, how good is it that we can get into the prophetic books again this afternoon, or otherwise known as the Nephilim in the Hebrew word, as the Hebrew word for the prophetic books. So for those that don't know me, I'm Kelly. I know there are those that view this actual video or recording, should I say, after we have done the recording. Please know that you are most welcome. And like I said, my name is Kelly and I'm here to study with you today the Haftarah. And this week we are actually in week 26, which is Shemini, which means 8 or 8th day. And there are so many things that like what the 8th day symbolizes. But I'm actually going to leave that for Pastor Greg tomorrow for the Torah portion to elaborate on this a bit more. If you don't know, it is on at 9:30 on a Saturday morning, and he will be going through in more detail what the 8th day actually represents in conjunction to the Torah portion that he actually studies. However, for us today, we are moving into a new prophetic book. You know us, we like to move around the Bible, or should I say just the prophetic books, and we are looking at the book of 2 Samuel. So just before we launch into that, I just wanted to mention a little bit of housekeeping and let you know that as of right now, we will be doing the Haftarah on a fortnightly basis. So next week, there will not be any live study with regards to the Haftarah or any study in that sense, and it will come up again the following week. So not next week, the following week. But I do encourage you, I will be myself looking at the word myself, looking at the Haftarah. I don't know about you, but I have just found it so valuable in terms of just broadening my knowledge about the prophetic books. But I would also say just the historical biblical timelines. Have you guys found that too? You know, just understanding that time between, say, the Torah and then, of course, the New Testament when Jesus is on the scene. So I encourage you to continue to study. Well, last week we were looking at the timeline of between 550 and 650 BCE, and we were actually looking at one of Jeremiah's prophecies that were directed to the Israelites. Now, you could say it was like one of the final prophecies that he gave to them prior to the destruction of the first temple that King Solomon had built. Excuse me. We discussed how the Israelites over several hundreds of years had actually turned away from God, still doing sacrifices in the temple where God's name doing that along with them turning also to other gods, hence they were practicing idolatry. And in that portion, of course, we also saw that they brought abominable things into the temple and how they sacrificed their children to Molech outside Jerusalem in a place called the Valley Hinnom. We didn't actually delve into that deep enough, but we read about it. And we also talked about obedience over sacrifice and what that really means. And to be fair, again, there was so much more that I wanted to give you on that, but of course we scratched the surface. So they were doing these sacrifices as a ritual process, and they thought as long as the temple stands, we'll be fine by giving these sacrifices. But of course, that is not the case. And just as God removed his presence from Shiloh, he also removed his presence from the northern kingdom. He was now going to remove from the southern kingdom, and that is what happened. And Prophet Jeremiah got to see that. So if you want to look at that study in depth, then go to week 25 to Zav, and you will see that on the Torah portion I think it's under the video section. Yes, under the video section of the Torah portion of Tazar. All right, this week we sit between 900 and 1000 BCE. So we are sitting on the timeline 400 years closer from last week, but to creation. So going back towards creation. And this is when the kingdom is under the reign of King David, and it is one kingdom. And this week we are actually looking at the biblical account of the Ark being taken into Jerusalem by David, and, you know, the circumstances that happened around them. Now, just remember, I just want to flag with you, and we have spoken about this a few times, 2 Samuel is considered a prophetic book by the Jewish community because it was originally authored by the prophetic schools of that time. And of course, you know, this is actually Samuel himself writing this book, and he was known as a prophet, a priest, and a judge. So I would like to actually just quickly share the screen just to show you on the timeline. You know me, I like to always show you a visual. I find it is in fact easier to understand. And just bear with me, it's just behind the screen. I just need to get back up there. Perfect, here we go. I'll zoom in. Now, here we go. So what we're seeing here is this is the Torah portion down on this green bar, Leviticus. And this is where we're sitting, right in the middle here, like I said, around the 900 to 1000 BCE. Now, if we were to look in this next, and just out of interest, last week we were back here. So as you can see, this dotted line was where we were last week. We now have jumped more towards creation, towards when the Torah is written. And a close-up, which really just gives you a bit of an idea with the prophets. Oops, sorry guys. This is where we were last week with Jeremiah, and now we're here with David and Samuel. So you can see that difference in timeline. Perfect. All right, back to the study. I've just got to move my Zoom screen over so I can have a look at my notes. All right, without further ado, Norma, do you mind bringing us in with a prayer, please?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Do you mind if I pray one of King David's prayers? In Psalm 25, he says, "To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Make us all to know your ways, O Lord, and teach us your paths. Lead us in your truth and teach us, for you are the God of our salvation, and for you we wait all the day long." So, Father, I just pray your blessing and anointing on Kelly and open our hearts to receive what you have to teach us today. I ask it and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think you're on prayer duty every week, Norma.
Oh, no.
No, that was just so fitting to pick up a prayer, a psalm from David, King David himself. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, what we're going to do is actually do the reading and where the portion is that it comes from. And that is from 2 Samuel 6, chapter 6, verses 1 to 7. I'll start again. 2 Samuel chapter 6, 1 to the end of that chapter, and then it rolls on over to chapter 7 to verse 17. Now, we're not going to read the whole lot of that today, namely because we are not going to get to all of it. And I really just want to read the section that we're focusing on. We will have to wait till next year until we can focus on the next bit. So I'm going to ask if Vanessa can actually do the reading for us. If you can kindly do that, that'd be great, Vanessa.
The whole thing.
From 2 Samuel chapter 6, 1 to 15. Thank you.
David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David rose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David of Israel was celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David, but David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. And it was told King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fatted animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vanessa. So as you can see, if you were to continue to read on there in this portion, it actually talks about the occurrence, the encounter of David and Michal, which is actually his wife. And then, of course, in chapter 7, so the last part of the portion, it goes on to talk about the Lord's covenant with David. And so I know I'm looking forward to looking at in more detail next year. So who are the key people of the study this today? Well, of course, King David. That's the resounding theme. And of course, Samuel also wrote this book, as we said earlier. We see Michal, which I mentioned before, who is the daughter of King Saul. Now I won't go into detail about Michal today, mainly because Michelle, who takes Women of the Word every Tuesday at 10 a.m., did a wonderful job and went through her background, the details about her, and the relationship of her in conjunction to David. So if you want more information on Michal, please listen to Michelle. It was a really fantastic study. So I'm not going to be touching on that today. Other people that pop up is Abinadab, Uzzah, and Ohio. We have lots of fun names today. So please forgive me if I do a slip up. I'll try my best. But we have them, but as we get to them, I will discuss a little bit more about them. Now, with regards to King David, to be honest, a lot of us already know a lot about them. There's also some great rabbinical insights and thoughts of him as well that I would encourage you to pursue in your own time. One being which he was actually a son of a slave. That is not Jesse, his father, but his mother was apparently a slave. And he did not get the same education as his brothers, hence why he was out in the pastures attending sheep. But, you know, what is actually, if this is actually true, what is amazing is that God still utilizes his skills to tend sheep to eventually lead a nation. All right, so how does this link to the Torah portion? We know the Haftarah has always got some link to this week's Torah portion. Does any one of you guys hazard a guess as to what that may be? Those that have studied it. Any thoughts, Vanessa? What about you, Norma? Any thoughts?
What was the question?
That's okay. Have you any of you got any? It's fine. I'm sorry. I know I do the same thing. I write down and then I miss what the person's saying. So I completely hear you. Any ideas of how the Torah portion, the Haftarah links to the Torah portion this week? What is the common link here?
Is the Torah portion?
Well, it would be the Ark of the Covenant, wouldn't it? Probably.
The what? Sorry.
The Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, that's
to predominate.
Yes, it's a significant thing. Yes.
Did someone die?
Someone died. Someone did die. Yes, that's exactly what it is, Vanessa. The link is someone died. The death of Uzzah, when he put out his hand and touched the ark, it is, you know, similar or has that same similarity to the deaths of Aaron's sons, Nabat and Abihu, in Leviticus, when they brought the incense with the unknown fire. So that is the common link. And there are other bits and pieces that beautifully link with that, but that is what it is known to link with. Now, just a little bit about the historical context, which we do need to know this as we read into this portion this week. So we're going to pick up in the time period when Eli, who was the high priest at Shiloh, when the ark and the tabernacle was located there. But also note, he was also the judge at the time. They tended to have dual roles. So you remember after Joshua took the Israelites into the promised land. And before the kings that were established with King Saul, there were judges. And I think from memory, there's about 15 judges between that time period. So it is at this time that Eli, being a high priest and judge at Shiloh, the Israelites actually took the ark and took it with them to Ebenezer against the Philistines. And we see this in 1 Samuel 4:5. However, the Philistines defeated Israel and took the ark and took it to Ashdod in 1 Samuel 5:1. Now, you may remember me briefly talking last week in last week's portion, because the actual portion Bible verses makes reference to Shiloh, where it said that God said he would, just like Shiloh, take his dwelling presence out, move his name out of there. And the same would happen in the temple, the first temple, hence the Babylonian invasion, hence the Israelite exile. So the Philistines took the ark from Shiloh, when they took it out to battle. So they had it out the battle, and they took the ark and took it to the house of Dagon. And this was a Philistine idol. And because, or a Philistine temple house, whatever you may want to call it. And because of this, the Philistines were afflicted by God himself. There we see the idol of Dagon fall over, hands broken. The Philistines got afflicted by tumors. The Bible says there was this great destruction on them for doing this, for taking them in there, and sitting it with this idol god Dagon. I mean, can you imagine it? This ark sitting in such an idolatrous place where, I mean, this is the ultimate of the opposite of what God disdains this, hey? Like, it's the opposite of what God wants. You just have to think it back again to the 10 Commandments, that he's the only God and there should be no other gods beside him. And here he is in the middle of this temple of Dagon. So the Philistines, interesting enough, knew that God was afflicting them as well. So they had the ark for 7 months, and then they moved it around in Philistine areas to a place called Gath and Ekron. And then they had enough of this destruction and sent it back to the owners, the Israelites. And you see that in 1 Samuel 6:1. We then see the cows pull up on the ark, with the ark on it. Well, I just said that, didn't I? With the ark on it at Beth Shemesh. And the people that were in the fields at Beth Shemesh, the Israelites, they were so excited. They came up to this cart, dismantled the cart, and pulled it to pieces, not the ark, the cart, and built a fire. And there they took the cows that came with the cart and the ark. I should make a song, cart ark, and sacrificed them to the Lord. Sadly, though, they did look into the ark, and in 1 Samuel 6:19, it says that 50,000 plus 70 men, which would be the elders, were killed. And with them, the men of Beth Shemesh were obviously terrified and wanted it moved on. And we see it moved on to a new place called Kiryat Yearim. Yes, that is right. Kiryat Yearim. I'm trying with my Hebrew words. So I'm breaking it down syllable by syllable here so we get it clear and how they say it. Kiryat Yearim. And, they asked them in 1 Samuel 6:21 to take the ark. So let's just read 1 Samuel 7:1-2. I'll just read this out in front of me here of what happens. So the men of Kiryat Yearim came and took up the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. Notice it says on the hill. And they consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From that day, that ark was lodged at Kiryat Yearim. A long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So it stayed there for 20 years. So after this, we see King Saul eventually come into position. This is after the judges, because Israel wanted a king. He reigned, they say, for about 20 years. Some say 42. I threw that in there. Most of the rabbis actually say 22 years. And eventually, it's actually, the reason I say it is it's actually not that clear in the Bible. There's an interesting verse, which I may take you to later on, which is a little bit possibly challenging to understand. So eventually Saul was going to lose, we saw Saul was going to lose his reign due to the disobedience by not destroying all of the Amalekite people. And this is outlined in 1 Samuel 15. And we didn't actually get to this last week, but I actually had it down in my notes because it was talking about being obedience is better than sacrifice, and how rebellion, disobedience, is a sin of sorcery and divination, and defiance and stubbornness is like wickedness of idolatry. So it was actually a really good, powerful point to last week's study. But I encourage you to read 1 Samuel 15. It really changed my perspective on how to understand why they said obedience is better than sacrifice. When he died, that is, when King Saul died, Ishabeth, which was his son, and it was the fourth son of King Saul, as he was the next in line because the first three sons died in battle with Saul, was anointed king over Gilead, the Uhurites, Jezreel, Ephraim, and Benjamin, and over all of Israel. But the tribe of Judah anointed King David over the house of Judah. And of course, he was residing in Hebron. So if you want to read all that, that is in 2 Samuel 2, 4-11. But in 2 Samuel 2:10, it actually says that Ishabeth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned for 2 years. But the house of Judah continued to follow David. So this is quite early in time, and we see this semi-division occur, don't we, with the tribes of who they were loyal to either King Saul and to King David. But in the end, Abner, who was Ishabeth's military commander, defected from him and aligned himself with David. And this is in 2 Samuel 3, 6-12. Abner returns and goes to David with David's wife, Michal, because that's what David wanted, because she had been kept with Saul's son Ishabeth in this time. And in that time, Michelle explains what happens in that time when they were not together. I'm not going to go into it, so you have to listen to Michelle's study. But then that's when we see the rest of the kingdom of Israel give their loyalty back to King David. It was at that time. And King David then took over Jerusalem by defeating the Jebusites. There's some amazing videos on YouTube that shows you how he did that. And the Philistines came to try and fight against him again. But then David turned his attention to the ark and the tabernacle and making sure that the worship of the Israelites' worship was followed and was at the forefront of their mind. So up until this point, the ark and what was left of the tabernacle was still at Kiriath Yearim, at Abinadab's house. And this is where we pick it up. So in 1 Samuel 6, 1-2, I'll just quickly read the first verses of our portion again today. It said, David again gathered all the all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And you know what? I find it amazing that this ark sat in Abinadab's house for a long period of time. So I don't know if you've thought about it, and I just want to open this up very quickly. Like, how long do you think it might have been sitting there for at Abinadab's house? I've given you, the 20 years that Eli, it said in that verse back with Eli that it was there for 20 years. And I've given you an indication of maybe how long Saul, was in reign for. What kind of time period do you think we're talking about here? What are your thoughts, Vanessa? For 20 years, quite a couple of years. Any thoughts, Norma? No stress if you don't. I'm just throwing it out there, opening up the discussion. Well, let me just take you through. So we've got Eli. It said in that verse that the house was there for 20 years. And then King Saul, that is the first king of Israel, came into power, and he reigned either between 22 years to 42 years. You know how I said there's a little bit of a variancy there. And it's not clear, but in verse, I won't. Yeah, so it's in 1 Samuel 13:1 where it says it's not entirely clear, because it says that he was 1 year old when he became king, and he reigned for 2 years. Others versions have added to it and said he reigns for 42 years. Not sure how they got that out of that, but according to like the rabbis, they say they actually think that this wasn't completely translated correctly. Anyway, we're basing it on between 22 or 42 years he was in reign. I lean towards the 22 years. And then there was this couple of year tussle with Saul's son Ishabeth and David, where it says in 2 Samuel 2:10 that Ishabeth only reigned as king for the selected parts of Israel for 2 years. So we've got 22, so we're looking at 42 years so far. Plus whatever time it took David to decide to move the ark, and remember he was still dealing with the Philistines, so maybe, I don't know, add another couple of years. But we're looking at this ark sitting in Abinadab's house for, I don't know, either between 44 and 70 years. I find it amazing. Like, I'm 47 years old, and although time has gone fast, it also has, you know, gone slow, so to speak, as well. And I don't know. I just can't imagine. Well, I can't imagine the ark being in someone's house for so long. And, and I kind of think about where would I put the ark if it was in my house? Would I move out so we could put it there? And again, it's one of those verses that we kind of, skip over and probably not think about, well, it's in this place, and there's obviously a reason why it's in this place, but I find it quite interesting. But the other thing I think we need to consider is, when he talks about Abinadab, I mean, it also talks about being on this hill, which we'll look at a bit later, but who is Abinadab, and why was it given to him? So a little bit about Abinadab. I was going to just share with you from Antiquities of the Jews 6:4. It mentions the following, where it says, "But now it was that the wrath of God overtook them and struck 70 persons of the village of Beth-Shemesh dead, who, not being priests and so not worthy to touch the ark, had approached to it. Those of the village wept for those that had thus suffered, and made such a lamentation as was naturally to be expected on so great a misfortune that was sent from God, and everyone mourned for his own relation. And since they acknowledged themselves unworthy of the ark's abode with them, they sent to the public senate of the Israelites and informed them that the ark was returned by the Philistines, which when they knew, so they brought it to Kiriath-Jearim, a city in the neighborhood of Beth-Shemesh." So this was the neighborhood of Beth-Shemesh we were talking about before, where all the people died. So in this city lived one man, Abinadab, by birth a Levite, and who was greatly commended for his righteous and religious course of life. So they brought the ark to his house, to place fit for God himself to abide in, since there did inhabit a righteous man. His sons also administered to the divine service of the ark, and were the principal curators of it for 20 years. For so many years it continued there, having been at the Philistines previously. So Abinadab was actually a Levite. So for me, and hopefully for you, it clarifies a bit more why it was taken there. So he was a Levite by birth. As to were their sons, his sons, obviously, and this will actually make more sense later on when they then come and pick it up. All right. So I also want to point out too, there's a couple of Abinadabs in the Bible. So we need to make sure that when we're studying this person, we find the right person, because actually Saul's son, one of his first three sons, their name was Abinadab, but he died with Saul in battle. So let me just quickly share my screen. This just gives you a bit of an idea of where the ark traveled. Hang on, it looks like I've lost my sharing. Oh no, there are my sharing options. Okay, so this gives you a bit of an idea. It started at Shiloh and moved to Ebenezer in battle, down to Ashdod, where they took it, that is the Philistines, to Gath and Ekron, the Philistines were at Bathsheba, and now it is in Kiriath Jearim. and it will be making its way to Jerusalem. So it's almost like a half circle we've done here, but that just gives us a perspective of where the ark had moved in its time. All right, I just want to keep a track of time and where we are at, because, all right, we'll keep continuing with the 30,000. Okay, so if we're looking at verse 1, literally of the study this week, I don't know about you, but I was so surprised to see how many men there were that David gathered together, these chosen men. And Rashi actually says that all these chosen men of Israel was 30,000, because they gathered for him when they had crowned him in Hebron. And therefore, this was a second gathering, hence why it says again gathered. So he is saying that these men came for him when he was anointed to be king, and they're there again for this occasion that, it's even bigger than being king. It's bringing the ark into where it needs to come into. So I wanted to give you a bit of a picture of what 30,000 look like, because we always love a visual. And let me just share my screen again with you. I probably should have just stayed on there, but anyway. So I found a stadium down in Melbourne. It's the rectangular stadium in Melbourne. That is literally what it's called, the Melbourne Rectangular Stadium. And they house 30,050 people. So I don't know, we might just take this row out right here. But this just gives you a perspective of what 30,000 looks like. And this is amazing to me, because I think of what would have been around in Jerusalem in terms of infrastructure in Jerusalem, and how they accommodate these people. It obviously would have been on side of a hill or whatever it might have been, where he is addressing these people in some capacity. But this is what it looks like in what we can understand today. That is a lot of people, would you not say? So this whole stadium is 30,000 people. All right, so what does he have to say about this? Okay, I'll just get back to my screen. So one thing I didn't mention earlier, the parallel reading for the scripture today is actually found in 1 Chronicles 13 and 1 Chronicles 15. And if we look at 1 Chronicles 13, 1-4, it says, David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, with every leader. And David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in all the lands of Israel as the priests and Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. Let us bring again the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. All the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. So Rashi says here that David confirmed with officers of the thousands. He said to them, you have already engaged in matters that are of your benefit, for you have a king to save you, and now you should engage in the honor of God, which is clear of what they're going to do. In Antiquities of the Jews 7:4, it says David thought it proper upon a consultation with the elders, the rulers, and the captors. So he's fleshed it out a bit more to include the elders and the rulers, to send for those who were in the flower of their age, that is the youth. And when you actually look at some of the words that is in this first verse, it actually does say the base Hebrew word is youth on some of the words. I think it's either, I can't remember, it might be troops, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember off the top of my head, and all countrymen, and the whole land with all the priests and the Levites, in order to get the ark from Kiriath Jearim, to bring it up to to bring up the Ark of God out of the city and carry it to Jerusalem, and there to keep it and offer it before the sacrifices and those others honors which God used to be well pleased. So they realize they need to get this back in order. So clearly now it's a time to get their worship in order and to remember to put God first and the covenant he has made with them and they had agreed to do with their ancestors. So he essentially consulted with these guys, hundreds of thousands and every leader. So who are these captains and commanders and troops? Well, if we look at 1 Chronicles 12, it actually goes through the tribes that come to support their loyalty to David at various times of warfare, be it against Saul or the Philistines. Now remember, not all Israel was following David. They were actually following Saul, except for Judah. So here we see these tribes slowly start coming and aligning with King David and putting their loyalty to King David. And towards the end of chapter 12, you actually see the amount of numbers of people, men that were equipped for war from these tribes. Now, I haven't added them up, but there was a lot, when I was just reading through. If we look at verse 18 of 1 Chronicles 12, it actually says, and the Spirit clothed the Amasai, chief of the 30, and he said, we are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse, peace, peace to you, and peace to your helpers, for your God helps you. Then David received them and made them captains of the troops. And so now when he's calling to them together, if we jump back to our actual Torah, Haftarah portion verse today in 2 Samuel 6 verse 1, where it says 30,000 men, he is actually calling the captains of the troops, the actual leaders of the tribes, the priests, the Levites, as it says in Antiquities of the Jews, they are all coming together. Mind you, 30,000 was just a portion of that total amount of troops. Even though it looked a lot in that stadium, that still was just a portion. And to me, it's actually a wonderful picture of leadership, that he is bringing together all these tribes that were once pledging their loyalty to Saul, except for Judah, and now pledging their loyalty to David. They are all now reuniting, and this coming together to focus on the ark and the tabernacle and what that represents was just like Moses was doing in the Torah portion this week, where he was bringing the elders and Aaron's sons, and of course all the people were also gathered there to see this beautiful 8-day celebration. And of course, they were going to see, well, essentially what they saw is that God was going to reveal himself. His fire came down, as we see in the Torah portion. So I just want to quickly point out something before moving on. In 1 Chronicles 13:5, it actually said, and David assembled all Israel from the Nile of Egypt to Lebo Hamath. And Lebo actually means the entrance of. So when I refer to 1 Chronicles 13:15, remember that's the parallel verses to today's reading. So he assembled all of Israel from the Nile of Egypt to Lebo Hamath to bring the ark from Kiriath Jearim. And Hamath is actually located in Syria. So it's sort of like just over the other side. Well, at that time, it was probably included in it. So these locations that he mentioned here is really encompassing right down the southern end, where it says, the Nile of Egypt. And then, of course, we're looking to the northern borders where these other tribes of Israel dwell. So, let's bring them all together. And interestingly, we see the same with Solomon, King Solomon, when he was in reign after David died. And we see this in 1 Kings 8:65, where it says, so Solomon held the feast at that time, and all Israel was with him, a great assembly from Hamath to the brook of Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days. Now, you may remember me talking about when they brought the ark into the temple and the celebration. And we were talking about, oh, that is the first temple. And we're seeing that here with David. It's like this duplicate. And, you know, it was when they were doing the inauguration of the temple, bringing the ark in. And do you, Vanessa or Norma, remember what festival we were looking at when this occurred? It's okay if you don't know, but I just thought maybe jog your memory. I know you'll know it when I say it. You'll be like, yes, I know. It was so hot that, yes, Vanessa, just, oh, yes, of course I knew that. And don't worry, I'm the same. I have to be reminded. So Feast of Tabernacles, hence the bringing together in all, you know, this great assembly to come to Israel. And remember, there's the 3 festivals that the Israelites do this. They come to Israel to offer their sacrifices for 3 festivals. And the 2 other ones is Passover and Shavuot. So they were there at that time. So it's interesting that David is also doing this. And I couldn't actually see anything specific, whether it was that time of the year in my studies, but I'm happy to be proven wrong by all means. So, all right. So, but of course, you know, this is a momentous occasion. They are bringing this ark out that has been in this place for so long and wanting to bring it in through to Jerusalem. And you know what? It's like bringing all these people is like when we see Messiah returns. When, you know, we're seeing his people already making Aliyah, and, you know, we know in his word, he talks about he's going to build the temple and he's going to draw, you know, the Jew and Gentile to him. So there's this beautiful thread that we see follow throughout the Bible right into the time when Jesus return, Messiah returns. All right, so I'm just going to quickly show you the screen of that border outline. Just, I mean, it's probably pretty straightforward, but at the same time, we're going to show it. Oop. Oh, might need to shrink the screen down a little. There we go. So that gives you a bit of an idea. We've got the River Nile down here, and then we've got it says the land of Hamath. So it sits in around here. So you can see it actually encompasses this whole area of Israel. Now, this is not in relation to, these lines are not in relation to the portion we're reading today. I just picked this image purely because it had the names written on it so you could see it. This may be a little bit more of a better indication. And I need to also mention that in the scripture that we're reading, when it talks about the armies coming under David or the tribes coming under David, they're including those tribes that were on the east side of the Jordan. Remember, I think it was Manasseh, and what was the other tribe on the east side? And remember that when they said they wanted to settle there, it was said that they had to be included when they come into battle. They had to come over the Jordan and obviously be a part of battle when Israel would go into battle. And of course they were. You will actually read that. Okay, so all these 30,000 agreed and organized for them to bring this ark back from Kiriath Yearim. Now, I was going to talk about Kiriath, but I'm not going to, because I actually want to get to the cart. So I'm just going to skip through that. Just bear with me while I get down to the page I need to get to. But I would do your own study on that location. There is a reason why, well, there is a history to why it's there. And of course, sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once. There's a reason why it's there, but it gives you an understanding also because it links to the word Baal Judah. It actually is just the same. It's just the new name for Baal Judah because it was previously a Canaanite city. So you can do your own study on that. Okay, let me see. Where's my... Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go to 2 Samuel 6:3. That's the 3rd verse of today's portion. And it says, "And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart." But I love it here because they obviously wanted to impress the importance that there was a new cart, because they said it twice. and when you look at this picture here, can you think maybe what might be wrong with this to start with, just from what you know so far with the history of the ark and where it came from and where, it went to Philistines, came back, whatever. Is there anything that may look wrong in this picture? Just from basic understanding.
Are they supposed to carry the cart?
Oh, yes, Vanessa. You are up there with it. Absolutely, yeah. In all, fairness, maybe King David was inspired by the cart maneuver that the Philistines did. I don't know, but that's obviously how it came back to the Israelites. Was it the right thing to do? And I think we need to think back to what the Torah says about how the ark should be transported. And we see in Exodus 25:13-15, because it actually clarifies this process. So Exodus 25:13-15. I don't know if you want to quickly pull that up. Thank you, Vanessa. Yep.
Exodus 25:13-15. You shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold, and you shall put poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark by them. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, and they shall not be taken from it. And you shall put into the ark the testimony that I shall.
Perfect. Thank you. So, I don't know, maybe they lost their poles. That's why they were putting it on the cart. I'm not sure. But, if we read a few verses later in verse 13, it says that there were carriers. That is verse 13 of today's portion. There were carriers and bearers of the ark. So maybe there was poles still on the side of the ark to carry it. So how do we make sense of all this? Well, let's read 1 Chronicles 15:1 for a cross-reference of this and see what it says to help us. So we're stepping forward a little bit in time in the verses to help us give understanding and clarity on what this verse means. So this is after Uzzah actually has touched the ark. You may remember we read that when Vanessa was reading the portion earlier today, and they try a second time to move it. So I'm just going to read this quickly. 1 Chronicles 15:1. David built houses for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said that no one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, for the Lord had chosen them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister to them forever. So remember, I'm just going to pause after this. So remember that Uzzah and Ahio were of Levitical line by Eleazar, their dad, and Abinadab, their grandfather. Okay, so that was the line. So we know that they were in the Levitical line. Let's jump down to verse 11 and 15 in 1 Chronicles 15. It says, then David summoned the priests, Zadok, Abiathar, and the Levites, Uriel, Asaiah, Joel, Shemaiah, Eliel, and Abinadab, and said to them, you are the heads of the fathers of houses of the Levites. Consecrate yourselves, you and your brothers, so that you may bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, to the place that I have prepared for it, because you did not carry it the first time. The Lord our God broke out against us because we did not seek him according to the rule. So the priests and the Levites consecrated themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, and the Levites carried the ark of God on their shoulders with the poles, as Moses had commanded according to the word of God. So when we do look at that verse in 13, I think it was did I say verse 13? Where it says, the bearers and the carriers, the second time they tried to pick up the ark, they did have the poles and they did put the ark on their shoulder. So I also want you to just notice in what we just read then, that in verse 12 and 13, it's mentioned twice here, once in each verse, that the priests consecrated and sanctified themselves before doing so. And this is exactly like what happened in the Torah portion I think it was last week, they went through the 7-day process. The Levitical priest, Aaron and his sons, went through this sanctification and consecration process to come up to the 8th day, which is the portion this week. So they consecrated themselves so they could do their duties. And it was no different with regards to this. So in Midrash Sefrid Bamrabah 46:2, Rabbi Nathan says, this escaped David, that the Levites bore the ark in the wagon, like the Philistines did, and they placed the ark of God in the wagon, as we see in 2 Samuel 6:3, what we've just been reading. Ahithophel said to David, should you not have learned from Moses, your master, that the Levites bore the ark on their shoulders, as it is written, and to your sons of Kohath he gave none, for the burden of the holy things was there. Therefore, they were to be borne upon the shoulders. Therefore, David afterwards sent and had it borne on the shoulders, as is written in 1 Chronicles 15:11-15. And that's what we just read. And of course, Maimonides also shares the same point of view, saying that it is a mitzvah, it is a command to carry the ark on their shoulders. So what does it say? It's making it very clear that in 1 Chronicles and in the supporting Midrash and Maimonides, that these are meant to be, the ark is meant to be carried on the shoulders of the Levites, especially the Kohathites, because that is the role that has been given to them from Moses, to carry all the elements of the tabernacle. That was their job. You know how the Levites were broken up into various roles? That was their role. And I'm not going to read it right now, but if you go to Numbers 4, 5 and 6, it talks about Aaron's family, the Cohen, the priests, would be in control of or managing the process of covering the ark with the cloths and the skin, and then the Kohathites would then come in and move it. So there was this process that had to happen. And again, in Numbers 4, 15, 19 and 20, it is very clear references that they were not to even look at Aaron and his sons wrapping the holy items, lest they die, or even touch anything holy. So when we read 2 Samuel, the portion today, chapter 6, verses 6-7, it will start to make sense what went wrong. So we're going to read that now, and I just want you to point out to me what you think went wrong here. It says, this is the verse, this is the Torah portion this week, 2 Samuel 6, 6-7. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nahon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of the God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. So what now, after knowing what we know, did they not do? Did they not do, or should they have done? What was wrong with this picture? He shouldn't have touched it, because we know from just reading, we didn't read Numbers, but in Numbers it's very clear that they are not to even look at them when they cover the ark. They are not to even touch it. So yes. And what about how it was handled in terms of how they were moving it? It was on the cart. And that's why, it shouldn't have been on the cart. It should have been the Kohathites. They should have been sanctified, gone through that consecration process, and used the poles to be able to move it. In verse 7, it says he was struck down because of his error. Some rabbis say there are two meanings of this word. In the Aramaic Hebrew, it says the root word is shalah, which means negligent. In the Akkadian Hebrew, it is shal, which means to treat disdainfully. And the rabbis are actually split on this, of which way to go, hence the interpretations that we sometimes get in regards to the story of Uzzah. But what we do know, whatever Uzzah did, we know that it wasn't right in God's eyes, because he got struck down. And the similar experience happened with Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, when they offered incense with a strange fire. For someone like us reading it today, I guess we could see it. Well, the oxen stumbled. He responded in a natural way to steady it, didn't he? even though he was a Levite and he would have been taught differently. I guess people might think it's just this natural reaction. I think that's understandable. But what about Nabid and Abihu in the Torah portion? You know, you could say, okay, well, they're still learning the ropes. They've only been a week in. But of course, it costs their lives. This natural reaction or learning the ropes, it actually costs their lives. And in Uzzah's case, in today's Haftarah, portion, the poles, you could say, was the safeguard between man and the ark, the holiness of the ark. So I want to open it up to you guys and tell me how you feel about this and what this evokes for you when you read this. Any thoughts? I know Vanessa's madly writing here. Maybe you are too, Norma. Well, what about you guys that are watching after the effect? You know, have a think about what kind of emotions evoke for you when you read this portion.
I feel like when God says specifically to put the poles there, to carry on, that's just protecting man and the ones who handle the ark. It's not because he's very nitpicky.
Okay, yeah.
In a way, it's to protect us like the rest of the Lord.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Okay. Did you have anything to say, Norma? You don't have to. I just thought you might have before.
I couldn't hear Vanessa.
Oh, you couldn't.
Obviously, it
Sorry, I was just saying.
was an act of disobedience,
Yeah.
Well,
but unintentional.
Ooh,
It was a normal reaction,
yeah.
wasn't it? But you sort of can't get away with it in God's sight.
No, that's right. That's right.
Mhm.
Sorry, Vanessa, what did you want to say?
no, I was just adding on because Norma couldn't hear me. But what Norma said, it was an act of disobedience, but it was unintentional. But it could have been avoided if they followed the laws in the Torah, which was to put the poles there, which is in a way to protect man from death.
Absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
like everything else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for me, when I look at it, if I was looking it through and have looked through this story with unknowledged lens, I probably thought, well, that doesn't seem fair. That's really unfair, even though they were warned. But I guess I look at it now and I go, wow, this is the holiness of God. And we need to understand this. We're in the book of Leviticus and it's all about holiness. And his holiness is not to be trifled with. And he's given those boundaries that sit around that. You know, the ark was to be honored and revered as the throne of God because that's what it was, the earthly form of the throne of God. And from here, it just seemed like it could be that, oh, we'll just put on the cart and we'll just head on up to Jerusalem. No. That's not how it is. He had given that direction. He had told them how to do it. And you see that they rectified that process. It's like it took 3 months for David to think about that process and go, oh, we did it wrong. We need to have our priests sanctified. We need to follow the Torah and follow God's instructions on that. And, you know, maybe Uzzah, Nabad, and Abihu, you know, all didn't have that right kind of fear, that holy awe for God's commandments. You know, the rabbis have thoughts on this as well, and I won't have time to get through because I really just want to get to the end point, but they do things, you know, they were saying things like that Uzzah didn't, you know, just didn't trust that God would rectify the situation. There are other comments on, you know, he did something completely wrong by showing, lifting up his skirt and, I don't know, relieving himself, which is a really interesting way of interpreting it. But what I do understand is that God did not punish Uzzah for any other reason that he was, he acted on a ritual prohibition. That is the touching of the ark. He knew, if he knew his job, which I believe he would have, although evidence shows that he didn't, he wouldn't have done it. And I guess the other side of it, we could look at it like a soldier laying down his life by standing in line of gunfire to protect his fellow soldier, couldn't you? So there's this side. But the rabbis say, and this is actually quite lovely, that God did look after Uzzah. He wasn't forgotten about, and that he was ushered directly to the world to come. And that is in Sotah 35a. So how is this applicable today? Well, we've got about a minute, and I just want to run through some ideas with you. I wanted to open this up, but I just want to leave this with you. I think, how is this applicable today? Well, I think we need to be thinking without old leaven, old thinking, old mindsets, things that take us away from him and his word, and not think, well, this doesn't apply to me today, because, having that kind of thinking actually just belittles the word of God. It absolutely does apply to us today. And we need to have an understanding of his holiness and not take it for granted. And, things like, not speaking ill of those that are anointed by God, I don't know, I had a whole list of stuff. Let me just find it. Like Korach did with Moses and Aaron, and not have any contempt for prophecy. And also the last thing I want to say is not adding our own theology to his word, his Torah. So I'm going to leave that with you today. There was a very quick nutshell at the end there, but do your own study on it. Look forward to seeing you guys in a fortnight's time. Other than that, bless you guys and have a fabulous week. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank